Here we are again. Thank you so much for joining us for the Gill Athletics Connections podcast. I'm on a little bit of a streak here with more than one coach at a time, and I'm loving it. I'm having a great time, and I think we're going to have a really good time today. Help me welcome today's guest from the North Dakota State University. I've got not head coach. What is your title? You are director of track and field, Stevie Keller, and then the associate director. These are big titles, man. I'm humbled you would be here. Associate director, Justin St. Clair. Justin, Stevie, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, great to be on. Thanks.
Absolutely. My first question was going to be, Stevie, now that you are the director, do we call you Steven? Like, is it official? Do we raise up the officiality of it?
Yeah, I don't know. That's my birth name, Stephen, but I'm Stephen the third. So I got tagged with Stevie at a young age, and most people I introduce myself to, I think they when they say Stevie or Steve or Steven, I'm really all three work for me. So
I think with your last name, Stevie flows better for some reason. Like Stevie Keller, like that's all feels like one word to me. So I think it works out really well. And Justin, you're just Justin,
Nothing special there.
Nothing special. Yeah, no, not at all. Well, that's not true. We're going to learn today about what's special about you guys and your program. Super excited. North Dakota State, and I mean this in all of the great ways, overachieves in relationship to other programs of their same size and stature, so to speak, right? I'm just so excited to learn more about what you guys do there, your culture, how you accomplish these wonderful things. There's got to be some secret sauce. We're all going to hope for the magic blue pill, something that we can all learn from and do and try to recreate this, but something tells me that it's not recreatable by one certain thing. I bet it's an amalgamation of things. So I'm super excited to learn that. Before we get to the Bison program and talk about the successes and the things that you do, why don't we take a step back and let's find out how you two individuals got to North Dakota State. Actually, Stevie, you're the head coach. I'll let you choose who wants to go first on how they got to North Dakota State. You want to put Justin on the hot seat?
No, I think Stevie would be best.
I think Justin would do a great job starting out.
I think Justin is the right person to start us out here. The track meets start with a throws, right? It's either a javelin or a hammer. So I think it's appropriate. Our throws coach starts us off. Justin, help us understand. How did you get to North Dakota State?
It's interesting because, I was obviously a javelin thrower in college, and that was always my passion. And to be honest, coaching really wasn't the path I kind of, in my mind going through college, that wasn't the path I was thinking like, hey, I'm going to be a college coach or to anything like that. My ultimate goal was to be either an FBI or DEA or lawyer. That was my major in college, was criminal justice and political science. So that was the avenue I was really interested in. And I guess in a good way and a bad way, javelin kind of kept going. And I figured out like, hey, I'm kind of good at this. And ultimately, I started school at Washington. I transferred to Boise State. My coach had retired. We were kind of in a situation like, well, we don't have a coach. What are we going to do? And then I was going to go to Arizona, actually. But the coach at Arizona went to Boise. And he called me up that summer and said, well, hey, I don't know if you know this or not, but I'm no longer going to be there. I'm going to Boise. And if you want to come, you're more than welcome. I said, well, I'm committed to you, so let's do that. And I went to Boise. And probably within the first 2 weeks, I was like, well, I don't know if this is for me. Big change. I'm at this age of my life, I want to live college. Like, I'm a city kid, big school, all this history. Then I go to Boise, it's a lot smaller. I'm from a big town in Seattle, so it's a big change for me. I was like, man, coach, I don't know if I can do this. He's like, well, if you want to go back, go back. Like, well, I'll stick it out. And fast forward many years, and Boise became like a really cool place for me. And I continued to train after college. And I was like, well, here we are 5 years in. I don't think I really want to go back to school. So what am I going to do? How am I going to support myself to continue throwing javelin? And a job came open, and I said, well, coach, what do you think? He's like, you should probably do it because this job allows you to stay within the sport, but also gives you a chance to continue to make money doing the sport. Because I didn't have any sponsorships or anything like that. So that college kid trying to make it.
Well,
And
help us understand on the javelin, Justin. You said you're from Washington, so that's a state that throws it. So you through high school,
yeah,
obviously into college, and then post collegiately.
that's right.
And,
Yeah.
and and who was this coach that you were? I want to say chasing, but you were following. This must have been a very impactful coach for you.
Yeah. So my very first coach was Ken Shannon at Washington, and then Mike Maynard, who was the coach at Arizona. Long tradition of great throwers and things like that. Great javelin tradition. And for me, he was like the guy.
Yeah,
So
Mike is Mr. Throws, right? And what I like about him is he has an unbelievable um, tree of coaches.
yeah,
Like there's some amazing, like a lot of I didn't know you transferred to Boise, but as soon as you said Boise, I was like, well, that makes so much sense that you got into coaching because there's been so many great athletes that have gone through there that have gone on to great coaching careers.
yeah, both domestic and internationally. So it's really he has a large tree per se. I think he mentored us really well. And that's one thing, like people always say, like, well, how'd you get into throwing the hammer or coaching the hammer and coaching the shot put and this and that? It's like, well, what you understand is I volunteered almost 5 years with Mike, and I was at every single practice with him all the time. And I'm the kind of person, I'm not really so much into just talking all the time. I'm into listening. So I just sit there and listen to Mike talk all day at practice, and I would learn a lot about it. And then, over time, we kind of got to the stage where it's like, well, again, it's time to either move on or be done with the javelin. So we decided, well, I took another job. I moved down to Louisiana. And really, it wasn't so much that I wanted to be coaching, it was that I wanted to continue throwing javelin. And that just kind of supplemented that. And then kind of found out like, hey, this is kind of cool. I kind of like this coaching thing. It allowed me to train, allowed me to coach. But ultimately, it was like more, I guess at that stage of my life, I didn't really think of it this way, but it kind of allowed me to kind of help others. And at that stage, I didn't think that way because I was pretty selfish. I was thinking about throwing, and that's really what I cared about. So we moved to Louisiana. Actually, when I say we, at the time it was my girlfriend. Now it's my wife. So this was 15 years ago.
So you didn't do any of the other events. Was it going to those practices and listening to Mike for the other events? Is that what allowed you to now coach all the events at a higher level? Is that what kind of started it? Or because you didn't have typically we think of coaches having an exercise science background or something like that. You had maybe the complete opposite of that. So there had to be some way of learning those events if you didn't participate in them.
Yeah, that's true. In high school, I mean, obviously, like every high school athlete, you kind of dibble and dabble with this and that. And, I threw shot and discus, but obviously not at a super high level by any means. And I guess I would say, obviously being with Mike was massively useful. I learned a lot, and I learned about programming and technique and things like that. But I also learned to understand like everybody's a little bit different in how they function and how they move. But biomechanics are biomechanics, and understanding like, hey, these type of positions, they're all the same relatively, like throwing, shot put, javelin, discus, very similar in a lot of movements. Limbs and levers are obviously different, but the idea on what you're trying to accomplish is similar. Now, hammer's obviously a little different. It's a different beast. So that's where I spent a lot of time with Mike because he's had a lot of success in also the hammer throw. So we spent a lot of time learning and just picking his brain. Well, what about this? And what do you think about this? And
that's interesting the way
you understand it.
That's interesting the way you talk about the different throws events for a couple of reasons. One, we've had several coaches like Brooks Johnson, and there's that talk about, don't pigeonhole yourself as a coach, that you're not a javelin coach or a sprints coach. You're a coach because there is a lot of similarities between a lot of the events.
Right.
The javelin, to me and to a lot of people, for the throws is a lot like the pole vault for the jumps. Like
Right.
there's lots of jumps coaches that, phenomenal long jump, triple jump, high jump, and won't touch the pole vault because it's so unique. Similarly, in the throws, there's lots of programs with great coaches that will coach the shot put, the discus, even the hammer and weight throw. And then that javelin, it's so different, so weird, if you will. They don't touch it. But you describe that there's a lot of similarities within those.
Yeah, I mean, in my vision, I mean, obviously there's, in the circle, you have the circle in javelin, you have the runway. So those are the differences really. But the idea of, separation and moving the center of mass through through the throw and all those type of things, to me, I see them as the same. How you do it might be a little bit different, but in my mind, I don't really think there are a whole lot of differences, to be honest.
Do you think, and we don't get into X's and O's on
Yeah.
this podcast, and at your level, you'd be over my head anyway. So, but I'm wondering, do you think, looking back now, and we're still going to get to your journey and get to North Dakota State, but I'm just curious, with your background of non-exercise science, but now having this pretty deep understanding, or at least the understanding as it applies to coaching track and field, of biomechanics, do you think your background, your lack of the science background educationally, is a bonus to you? Like, did that help you have to learn how to see and coach versus, oh, I already know angular momentums and force equal mass? Again, I'm from Alabama, so these are all over my head. But do you understand how I'm trying to phrase that?
What you're saying. I would say, yeah, because I'm the type of person, if I don't know something, I'm really going to dive in it and really figure it out and learn it. And I'm going to learn it inside and out. And not having those backgrounds, I think was important, because I kind of came in blind with no misconceptions or perceived ideas like, oh, it has to be this way or it has to be that way. It's kind of like, hey, let's figure this out. And as you figure it out, you put that piece together and this piece together. And I think it's always evolving, though. That's the beauty of it. And even here we are, many years later, it's still evolving because every athlete's different. So I'm not really the kind of coach that will say, hey, this is the only way. I think there's millions of ways to do it. And my job as a coach is to figure out what is that way. So it's great to have all the knowledge and all those things, but how do you put those pieces together? That's the magic, in my opinion.
I'm so thankful that you did become a track and field coach, but obviously with that type of curiosity and research likability, you would have been a really good FBI, CIA law enforcement. You'd have really, CSI'd a lot of your cases. You'd have been really good there. But I am super happy you're a track coach, and a lot of athletes are pretty happy that you became a track coach as well. So you're down in Louisiana. You obviously pick up some Louisiana accent. Where are you coaching at down there, and where did you go on from there?
So we went, when I say we, I always am including my wife in this deal. So we were there in Louisiana, southeastern Louisiana, and we had moved there literally right after Hurricane Katrina. So it was a nightmare. I mean, crazy times. And my wife is, she's from Thief River Falls, Minnesota, which is way up north, and night and day different from Louisiana. Big change, big culture shock. And it was hard for her at first. And again, we were there kind of just to supplement the training. And so was there for a couple of years. And then I was working with a fellow named Ty Saban when I was in Louisiana, because Ty was in McNeese, which was about an hour and a half drive. And Ty and I, we threw javelin against each other for a long time. Ty and I are very close. And he was coaching me at the time. Well, then Ty got the head job at the Olympic Training Center. So we're like, well, shucks, now what? And again, the whole idea was javelin. That was the goal. And he was like, well, I'll get you into the training center. It's just going to probably take a little bit of time. All right, sure, whatever. I didn't know how long that time was going to be. So an opportunity came open for me to move to North Carolina and coach at Duke. So I went there with the idea like, well, And I knew Jeff Gorski was there for javelin. So I was trying to piece together a way to continue training and continue coaching. It was before the Olympic year, so it was pretty important. And fast forward a little bit, couple months, and training's not going great. And Ty called and said, "Hey, you want to come to the training center?" Like, yeah. So middle of the year, moved to the training center and then continued to train there. And training was going pretty good. And I broke my elbow right before the Olympic trials.
How does one break their elbow?
That's a damn good question. Well, so my wife's a PT. She's a physical therapist. And I would call, "Oh, Kelly, my elbow really hurts." "Well, what are they telling you in the training room?" It's like, "Well," she's like, "No, that just doesn't sound right." I'm like, "Oh, stubborn athlete at this age. Like, Kelly, just be quiet, leave me alone. Like, that's their job. They'll figure it out." And she's like, "I don't know if you should be doing this." Well, one thing leads to another, and continue to throw and blah, blah, blah. Well, I ended up developing a stress fracture in my elbow.
From throwing and lifting.
And
Wow.
we were kind of to the point where, things were pretty bad and we're getting pretty desperate for like being able to train and things like that. So we're really kind of pushing the envelope and taking, some risks that you might not want to take. And ultimately I came down, the doctor, at this point we were like injecting Toradol and things like that just to make it through training, and come down on a training throw and pop. And Ty looked at me and said, "Did you just blow your elbow out?" I'm like, "I don't know. I didn't I felt nothing."
Wow.
Because I was pretty drugged up, I guess just from, obviously all legal and all those
painkillers and
And we walk out, we're at javelins, and he looks and said, "Oh boy, we better go up to the medical center." And the elbow's just blown up like a balloon. And that was it. And I said, "Well, what am I going to do now? I'm going to continue to train." So I stayed at training center for a couple more years and kept training. And Kelly's like, why are you doing this? Like, at this point, I've had a couple surgeries on my shoulder, one on my elbow, Achilles is all torn up. And it was kind of to the point now, it was like, this isn't fun anymore. This hurts. I'm tired of track and field in general. Like, been doing it since 8th grade. It's all I've ever done, from a real competitive standpoint. And I said, well, I'm going to go into law enforcement. This was my area of interest growing up, blah, blah, blah. So I started going through the application process with the DEA. And long story short, the application process is really long. It took about 2 years. And during that time frame, I decided I was going to go to Washington State and be in the state patrol. So I was a state trooper in Washington for a little bit. And I really kind of did that because, again, it was one of those things, I didn't know anything about the job itself. So I wanted to go through the training. I wanted to see what was it like, am I cut out for it? And all in preparation for going into the DEA and the academy. And lo and behold, okay, my academy class came up for the DEA, and they're like, well, bad news. Department of Justice is on a hiring freeze. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. This really stinks. And mind you, this has already been, almost 2 years of a process. I'm like, well, I just left the state patrol. I could have gone back, but I decided, well, I really want to go into the DEA. I don't really want to be a state patrol guy forever. That's not really what I want. And Kelly kind of looked at me. She's like, well, what do you want to do? I said, I don't know. I said, at this stage in my life, I don't know if I really want to do this job and wait for the Department of Justice to have an opening. Like, I don't know when that's going to come. So we're married and it's time to, like, be an adult now. It's time to, grow up, put on your big boy pants and make a decision in your life. So we said, well, what do you like? I said, well, I really actually truly enjoy coaching.
Were you getting you made a lot of contacts, obviously, as being an athlete for those many years, and then coaching at Southeast Louisiana, being at Duke. Obviously, again, you mentioned what a great lineage of coaches you had there, from Maynard, Ty Saban. Shout out to Ty, love him to death. What a great guy. Jeff Gorski. During that time, were you getting calls and emails or texts from people saying, "Hey, I've got a job," or "Hey, I heard this job, coaching job"? Were you being pulled in, or was it kind of a separate, you're on the DEA track at that point?
During that time, like I was really I get pretty narrow-minded, and I just once I kind of start thinking about one thing, that's it. Like I have a hard time, and like most wives, probably my wife gives me a hard time about that. Like, you can't multitask your brain. You only think about this. And once you do it, that's all you do. Like, you're dead to the world, basically.
Hey, remind her, because I'm like that. Remind her, yeah, I'm single tracked on you as well, wife. Like,
That's right.
that's all, yeah, just remind that it works positively.
See, Stevie laughs because we all live the same, we kind of had the same situation. But yeah, so no, at that time, like I was still young in the coaching career. Like I hadn't really done a whole lot, a couple little things like here and there. Because again, it was always like, it was about me. At that stage of my life, I wasn't really like, yeah, I was coaching, but it wasn't that I was coaching to serve everybody else. I was serving myself. And selfish, yes. But at that stage of my life, that's where I was. And so I wouldn't say there was like people that say, "Oh, let's do this. Let's, come over here, come work here." It really wasn't that situation. And that's what kind of led us to North Dakota State. Fast forward, because now my wife is from Thief River Falls. It's a great chance to bring her back into the environment of family and kind of where she was and where she grew up, because it's only 2 hours north of here. So in my mind, I thought that was like a really great situation. And not knowing anything, when I was growing up, I mean, I didn't know where North Dakota was. I didn't know where North Dakota State was. I didn't know a lick about it. I couldn't tell you a single thing. But long story short, Kelly and I had just got married. The opportunity came out to come interview. Literally, we were kind of on a makeshift honeymoon. And I came out, and I remember Lars picking me up at the airport, and mind you, I was in the state patrol. So like everything's yes, sir, no, sir, like very formal. I'm in a suit. It's hotter, pistol outside. I'm sweating to death. And if you don't know, I didn't know obviously Lars at that time. So here comes Lars zipping in his minivan, just shirt wild, hair wild, rolls the window down, looks out. "What the hell are you doing in a suit? You're a track coach." I'm like, all right, this guy's kind of cool. Hops in, zips me over to, we zip over to campus. There's a home football game. Says, "Yeah, let's get you out of this dang suit." And he throws me a polo, and, we're walking around at the football game, and Lars, I mean, again, like I didn't know much about this guy. Come to find out, this guy's like a legend. Everyone's saying, "Hi, Lars. Hi, this." I'm like, I feel like I was on the red carpet with the paparazzi, and like it was just amazing. And I remember sitting at the football game, and Lars taps me on the shoulder and, "Oh, look down there. That's one of our best recruits on the team, or one of the best recruits that we're recruiting." I'm like, okay, well, this guy doesn't look like too much. But at the time, the throws wasn't like as dominant as it is now. So that weekend was just a blast. Like I experienced things that I would have never experienced in my life. Like I met Lars's mom in the nursing home, and that was a very interesting treat.
On your interview?
On my interview, yeah. Like very interesting. And maybe a longer conversation. I'll tell you what, it was interesting.
Was it interesting, like an automatic, like, "Oh, I would fit here," and Kelly, we would fit here in this community, or more interesting, like, "All right, let's see what this leads to"?
I would say a combination of both, to be honest. Kind of like, hey, like I totally get like where Lars's stance is in life. Like there's nothing more important than the family. So I don't care if you're on an interview or not, I have to go take care of my mom. And to me, that was important. just a little side note. When we got into the room, there were some interesting things that I wasn't quite expecting. So we'll just kind of leave it there. And then fast forward to the next day, Lars and I were sitting at breakfast and we're chit-chatting, whatever. I'm suited up, formal, yes sir, no sir. And he's like, why are you in this suit? Like, this is totally unnecessary. But in my pocket is my phone, and my phone's buzzing. It's buzzing a little bit more, and it buzzes a little bit more. And he's like, are you gonna pick up your damn phone? I'm like, well, at least see who it is. Okay, sure. He's like, well, who is it? I was like, it's my mom. He stood up and walked away and said, no, you talk to your mom. She's more important than I am. You come and get me when you're done. And at that stage, I was like, this is a guy that I can have a lot of respect for, and somebody I want to work for, because he places a lot of value on the family. And at that time, no, I didn't have a family, but I understood what was important to him.
And you did have family. You didn't have children, maybe, but you had family, right? But what I love about that story is, there's one thing about talking about something. We value family. We value responsibility. And then there's action. And
right.
What an action step right there of, oh, hey, wait a minute, that's your mom? Hey, man, I can ask you these interview questions in an hour. It's your mom. Answer. Get a hold of me, come get me out of the hallway when you're done. That is action personified. That helped you. I would imagine that helped you really, like, okay, he's saying all this stuff, but no, he means it. Like right. This isn't going to change, right?
It's not bluff. It's situation. And so that was kind of neat. And then later on that afternoon, I meet with Stevie and Ryan, who was the women's head coach at the time. And they're just individuals that when you sit down and meet with, like, you're just relaxed. And there's certain things in life that just feel right. And you can't really explain it. And it's one of those things, and I say this, and I think Stevie probably says it a lot to recruits as well. It's when you talk on the phone about Fargo and NDSU, hey, it's one of those things that you have to come here and experience. Like, I can tell you about it all day, but it doesn't really give you the same sense as it does when you come and visit. It's just one of those things that it feels natural. And it checked every box that we were looking for. And I thought it was a great challenge, because my goal, I remember when I told somebody, hey, I'm going to take this job in North Dakota, they're like, where? Why? For what? I said, well, it felt right. And I think the support is right. And it brings Kelly home. And I want to make this place something that everybody will always be able to remember. That was a goal. I want to make this place the best throws program in the country. Now, how do you define the best throws program? Everyone has different values on how you define that. But I want us to be able to show up at a place and people say, hey, they're here and we better show up today. And that was a long-term goal for me.
Well, let's pause there. We've got you to North Dakota State. You've taken off your jacket and your tie and you're in a polo. I love that. I love that you came with a suit and tie, though. I mean, it shows the importance. And, with that, yes, sir, no, sir, you obviously would have fit in really well back down south in Louisiana. That's, it's how we grow up down there. I'm an Alabama boy. So we're yes, sir, no, sir, without the state trooper personified. So we got Justin to North Dakota State. Let's pause right there. We'll bring it back in. Stevie, this is a good time. Let's talk about how you got to North Dakota State. Can I assume you did not go to State Trooper Academy? I assume it's an academy, Justin. I don't know. Yeah. So, Stevie, did you go to State Trooper Academy? And probably not. So how did you get to North Dakota State?
Yeah, I know my story might be a little bit more boring than Justin's on my path to NDSU. First I grew up in the state of North Dakota, grew up in Harvey, North Dakota. My mom was a longtime high school track coach. So I've been drug around to track meets my whole life, basically growing up, did a lot of summer track. And my mom really pushed the multi events as a kid. you know, if you want to get a scholarship, you got to be a decathlete, you got to do the multis, things like that. So maybe she knew I wasn't good enough at one event to be able to get a scholarship.
Moms
But
know best.
yeah, so that's kind of how I got into track. And then out of high school, I was planning on playing football in college. That was my dominant sport, and track was just kind of on the, you know, something I did in the spring to make my mom happy, basically. My sister was a phenomenal track athlete and was at NDSU. And my senior year, since we're telling Lars stories, we came to Fargo for the state indoor. And at that time, the state indoor was it wasn't sanctioned by the state of North Dakota, but it was a big meet. Like every Class B school in the state of North Dakota came. And so I ended up winning the 800, the high jump, the hurdles, and I think I ran on our 4x4. So I think at that time, Lars realized here's a guy that he can run, he can jump, he can hurdle. So I'd had a little bit of conversation with him. And that night, we stayed in Fargo, and I was going up to Grand Forks the next day to meet with the football coaches again, and basically kind of tell them I'm coming to UND. And I went to Hornbacher's up in North Fargo to pick up some snacks and stuff. And I had my little sister with me, and we bumped into Lars, and he came up to me and pointed at my jacket. It was my football coat. It said Keller on it. He said, "Stevie?" And I'm like, "Yep." He's just like, "We need to talk sometime." And he's like, "What are you doing?" And, you know, I kind of told him, "Hey, I'm thinking about playing football." And he's like, "Don't make a decision right now," and things. So, you know, had I not bumped into him that day, I don't know that I would have ended up here. So long story short, got through the track season, got into June, finally made my decision to come to NDSU and just pursue track and field.
Isn't that so interesting? You know, at our ages of life, you know, we have the one thing that you can't force into somebody, right? Experience and perspective. So now at our age, we get to look back at these little incidental things that were really forks in the road, right? You had a decision there. Do I go and play football at another university, or do I go to NDSU? And no one would have faulted you for either of those decisions, but your life more than likely would have been radically different than it is today. You chose the right path. You know, you went this way to NDSU because you ran into him haphazardly. I mean, that's really interesting to work out there, huh?
Yeah, no, and I mean, obviously getting to know Lars over the last 25 plus years, you know, I laugh about that story because that's just like Justin said, that's just the way he is. You know, it's just you know, I thought this was some crazy guy that came up to me at the grocery store until I realized he was a track coach here and things and stuff. So I spent 3 years here as a student athlete, and then you know, I transferred to Montana State. After my third year here, wanted to give Division I an opportunity. NDSU was Division II. Kind of wanted to get out of North Dakota, wanted to get out of Fargo, and things. So I'd never been to Bozeman. I knew Dale Kennedy from some track camps that I worked. He was the head women's coach, and that's kind of how I, you know, ended up there. He said I never did meet Tom Idle until I started there, but that was my coach, and he had great praise for Tom. Talked to him on the phone. So I basically decided to go to Montana State, and in August I packed up my car and drove to Bozeman. And I remember they basically said, "You're going to live with such and such in this apartment." They're looking for a roommate, John Wirtz. He was a pole vaulter from Rapid City who had taken a year off and was coming back. And then Miguel Galeano, who was a distance runner, you know, there. So I just remember getting to Bozeman, and Bozeman's changed a lot since the 90s. But driving to the edge of town looking for like a Target, and there was no Target and things. And it's just, you know, now there's everything they need there in Bozeman. But and that really was a great fit for me. And really, when I left NDSU, I wanted to be an elementary teacher. I kind of thought about coaching. You know, at the time you had to be, to get a graduate assistantship, you had to have a physical education degree and basically teach and coach. So I switched my major to physical education, and then just working with Tom at Montana State and just really learning the ins and outs of every event, you know, in the decathlon. That's something I didn't have at NDSU. we had, we were Division II. We had a head men's coach and a head women's coach, and we had part-time coaches. And you just kind of went from coach to coach, and nobody really had a plan in place on, what you were doing each day. Those are the days of you'd show up at the track and there'd be a handwritten note on the board of what your workout was that day. And, during the outdoor season at NDSU, we didn't have a track my first few years here. So from like 87 or 88 to 96, NDSU didn't have a track. And I don't think Lars lost one conference title outdoors during that time. So you would go to Moorhead State, Moorhead High School, or Concordia. And, we didn't have cell phones or anything like that. So it was basically show up at one of the tracks. If people weren't there, go to the other track. And if they're not there, just get your workout in and go back to Fargo. So
how did we live back then?
I'd go a week without seeing Lars. And then it'd be, we'd have a team meeting the day before we left because he'd be with the sprinters. I just would hop in a car with the decathletes and just follow them around. So it was a lot of self-coaching and just being, reliable or depend on, your upperclassmen to kind of lead things. But so when I went to Montana State, things were totally different. I had one person that was coaching me in every event. I worked with Mike Kerrigan a little bit in the throws, and just learned a ton from Tom and Mike on, really why I want to be a track coach and things. So I stretched out my beans. I transferred, switched majors. I stretched out my my college to 5.5 years. And so in 99, I graduated in the fall. In the spring, I competed my final year for them. And then in August, I packed up and moved to New Zealand to student teach, which was an awesome experience.
Wait, you said packed up like you just threw your luggage in your car and drove like you did from North Dakota to Montana. New Zealand, sir. What in the world?
It was just one of those things that I was done with track and I wanted to experience, something different for student teaching. I hadn't traveled a ton, until I really got to college. And so, yeah, I went down there. They hook you up with a host family. It's all through Montana State University. I think there was like 12 of us that were spread out throughout the country and things. And then, I student taught down there. I ended up doing some coaching down there at one of the track clubs.
Yeah, I was going to ask, was there any track down there?
Yeah, once they found out I was a decathlete, I was pretty heavily pursued by them to try to compete in there. It was just, it's club track. So you can be 40, you can be 20 and compete in the meets. I never did end up competing in a meet because I hadn't really done much since nationals in Boise, other than a mountain bike and do some running here and there. But so, yeah, I helped out with the track club in town and just to do some coaching, just amazing difference between like what I experienced growing up and what those kids were experiencing. We would be high jumping on a basketball floor and the kids wouldn't be wearing shoes, just coming in and jumping barefoot. And a lot of those kids ran around barefoot just because that was a culture, and things. So, but I got a chance. I spent an extra month there and basically traveled the whole country with one of my buddies from college or from high school and college, and then came back basically broke because I wasn't making any money. And I when I got back to the States, I went back to Bozeman. It was January, so there was not a lot of teaching jobs and really not a lot of opportunity. I had landscaped in the summertime there, so I was kind of waiting for that season to roll around. So I was substitute teaching, and then my brother-in-law at the time was the head track coach out at Ingram High School in Seattle, and they needed a girls coach. So he called me, and I really had no plans. So I packed up once again and moved out to Seattle, lived with my sister and him.
What year were you in Seattle?
2000.
Were you in Seattle at that time, or were you? Say it again, Justin. I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
I was in Seattle in 2000 also.
How funny you guys were. I mean, Seattle's a big town. I get it, but you guys were in the same town, had no clue of each other, when where you would keep going in your careers and then eventually meet back up. That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's funny because when I was in Seattle, that's when the opportunity to come back to North Dakota State came available. Ryan Godfrey, who was a teammate of mine at NDSU, he was I think he was a part-time assistant, and the head coach had left on the women's side probably a year or so before. And so Ryan became like from a GA to an assistant. Lars took over both programs, but they wanted to, the thing about NDSU is we always had a head men's and a head women's coach, and they wanted to hire a head women's coach. So long story short, Ryan ends up getting the job as the head women's coach, and called me and asked if I would be interested in coming back as a graduate assistant and coaching. And yeah, didn't take me long to answer yes. I didn't know if I wanted to move back to Fargo. I'd been at some pretty cool places in Bozeman and New Zealand and Seattle and things like that, but it was home for me. And for me, I looked at it as 2 years of graduate school, get my master's degree, and hopefully get an opportunity to start coaching somewhere.
And that happened, but it was at North Dakota State, right?
Right. Yeah.
So how long have you been there total now?
Since 2000. So,
wow.
yeah. So, I mean, it's been a unique situation for me. I came here as a graduate assistant in the fall of 2000, finished up my graduate assistantship. That's a 2-year deal in 2002.
Now you say 2-year, college is typically 4 years. You went 5.5. Did you actually get your master's in 2?
No, but I did get my master's. They give you, I think once you start, you have 6 years. So the 6th year I finished my master's.
Hey, there's no expiration date, right? They don't tell you like, oh, you got master's in 6. Well, that doesn't count. No, you got the master's. That's all that matters.
Yep. Yeah, no. And so as a graduate assistant, it gave me, one of the big things that drew me to NDSU or back to NDSU was I felt like I could come here and be that person that we didn't have here, the person that could coach all the events of the decathlon and heptathlon, just have a training plan for those kids individually instead of sending them with the high jump coach or the long jump coach or the hurdles coach, and just really, be able to know what's going on day in and day out. And I feel like when I wasn't, when I was going from coach to coach, I was getting injured more. Because it was, hey, I didn't know how much the hurdle coach did yesterday. Now I'm trying to long jump or something like that. And as an athlete, you don't know any better. You just want to work hard and do what you can. So I spent my first 2 years as a graduate assistant, coaching the multis and the hurdlers. And then my second year, picked up the pole vault and the javelin. We had a volunteer vault coach, volunteer jav coach, which both left. And then after my graduate assistantship, Ryan and Lars kept saying, just, we'll find something for you. We'll find something for you. And at that time, NDSU was talking about their moving to Division I, the early stages of, can we move from Division II to Division I? Well, one of the things that helped me in that is that with moving up, you need to add coaches, you need to add, funding, things like that. So the softball coach at the time resigned, and he was the groundskeeper at LA Sports Complex, which is the track complex, the softball complex, the soccer complex, and the intramural fields. So it's a big old block of grass, basically. And so I ended up being a 9-month employee, assistant track coach, head groundskeeper at LA Sports Complex. Wow. So the funny thing is that, like, I come to find out there was no equipment. So I show up out there to, the grass is getting long and there was no direction on what to do. And finally somebody's like, just go across campus and talk to the grounds crew. And so they let me get a mower. And I would drive it back and forth across campus for so long until I think they trusted me. Okay, you can have this mower, you can have this weed eater and things. So it was, and I made some great connections on campus. And that's something that throughout my time here, when you need a favor across campus or something like that, as I transitioned out of the groundskeeper, I just, really made some good friends and some good connections.
There's some sad similarities to that groundskeeper example to coaching in some of our places. We're hired at some high schools and institutions to coach track. And then given no equipment. And I don't mean that as the equipment manufacturer here. I'm talking about, staff, no staff. You don't have any of that. Sometimes no tracks, no starting block, nothing, but it's, hey, go get them. So I love your resourcefulness of like, all right, well, I got to get this done. I better make some contacts and use some contacts to get the job done.
Yeah, and I was still like Justin. I continued to train for a while just because I love the sport and I love the competitive side of things. And I had two really good decathletes. I lucked out my first year; they were freshmen. Nate Schmidt and Andrew Ockery, who ended up being 76 plus and 75 plus as Division II guys. Pretty talented kids. So um, that was kind of what got me. I would work out with those guys and goof around, throw, I started to learn how to throw discus left-handed and vault left, just trying to teach myself how to do like how to coach basically by teaching myself how to do it with the non-dominant side, like really trying to analyze on how, what do I need to tell these guys? And one of them was left-handed, so that was part of it. I had to kind of figure out how to coach a left-handed thrower, vaulter, and things like that. So I always joke around with Andrew Carlson, our distance coach, is he'd be like, yeah, you used to weed eat in the during your rest in between intervals. I would be out there running intervals, and my job was to take care of the track. And I had work study students that worked for me, but you know what work studies like, they can only work so many hours and they show up half the time. So it was good. I mean, I enjoyed being outside. I enjoyed manual labor, but it got to be where I was painting. Now I got, as 2-3 years into it, I was painting the soccer fields, I was painting the practice football fields, and it just was to the point where I was ready to say, hey, I just want to coach, because it's taken away from my, I was coaching the vault, which is time consuming, the javelin, the decathlon, the heptathlon, and the sprinters and the hurdlers, and just really had a full day on the track.
You mentioned the transformation from Division II to Division I. Talk to us about what does that entail, and where were you in that transition? Meaning, I'm gonna call it part-time assistant coach to, during this transition, did you go to full-time assistant coach, et cetera? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so in 2004, we made the decision to move Division I. That was our last year. Division II, exploratory year, and that next year I became full-time, 12-month coach. I had a plan in place. I was going to go in and talk to the athletic director about, hey, I want a full-time job, and I'll do the grounds, I'll do the track thing, and this is what I'd like to make. And they called a meeting. I went in there. They offered me a job coaching and not doing the grounds for more than what I was going to ask for. So at the time, I was like, that it worked out pretty well.
You walk in with your plan, you just crumble it up. Like, yeah, you know what?
Never mind.
I'm just going to let you guys go with your plan.
Yeah. So that's really kind of where like our program started evolving into Division I, was the 2004, 2005. And it was a tough go for us on the track and field side. We had won a national title in Division II on the women's side. We'd been second several times. We were top 3 or 4 on the men's side. Really, when you looked at it, we were at the top of Division II, and things were going really well for us. We had a lot of success, and in recruiting, we always preach, come here, you can be a Division II All-American, and trying to get kids to stay in North Dakota, and Minnesota kids to come to North Dakota State. And then as we moved Division I, we were kind of left in limbo. We didn't have a conference. We had a 4-year probation from the national meet. So we had to get really creative with trying to, make people want to come to NDSU.
So you go from high-level Division II to this period where no nationals and no conference. So I'm going to ask it this way. What were you competing for? Like, how did you encourage the troops, if you will? What was your big rah-rah? What's the trophy? What's the end game if you don't have a conference or even a nationals to look forward to?
Yeah. So fortunately, South Dakota State moved with us. The NCC, we have now USD and UND are Division I, but at the time it was just us. It was just the state schools. So indoors, we did the Dakota Duel. That was our indoor championship at the end of the indoor season, and we hyped it up and made it fun for the kids. And then outdoors, we formed an independent conference. Northern Colorado was in transition. UC Davis was in transition. I think University of Portland was, I don't know that they were in transition, but they didn't have a conference. Who else was it? There was, every year we'd find a different school.
So you guys would come together and have a championship?
An outdoor championship. It was called the Independent. And then it became the Great West Conference.
Wow.
Yeah. So the kids had opportunity to compete at a conference level. It just was, really hard. It took me quite a few years not to look at that Division II national list and be like, man, we would have really done well this year. We'd had this many kids qualify.
Right.
And the separation between getting in the Division I meet and the Division II meet at the time, it was performance based, top 24 or 18 or whatever they had Division I. Now they've expanded to regions, and makes it a little bit more, we have more opportunity for our kids to have an opportunity to make it to the national meet.
Yeah, you brought up a good point there, Stevie. We tend to focus on that transition period on the recruiting athlete side. Like, how do you recruit a kid to a school that you don't have the opportunity to go to nationals for X amount of years through your career? But you brought up a really good point there about the coaching side of it. How do you stay motivated? You talked about you caught yourself looking back, if you will, like, oh, last year we would have had this kid and this kid at nationals, and you probably looked at the conference meeting, was like, yeah, we probably could have won that. How did you and the rest of your staff keep yourselves motivated for the kids' sake and for your own career sake?
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that we did when we sat down and they said, what do you guys need to be successful at Division I? What do we need to do? Well, number one was we need to provide the student athletes opportunities. We need to change our schedule. We need to increase our budget. We need to add coaches, all these things. And through the years of that exploratory, we ended up, adding some coaches. We looked at what is, some of the Big Ten conference schedules look like. So instead of getting on a bus and driving to Emporia, Kansas, I was hopping on a plane and flying to Miami, and hopping on a plane and going to Texas. So, I mean, our travel schedule changed drastically. Those nights of driving home after a meet in Emporia, Kansas, getting home at sunrise were in the past. So I think we were able to provide a great opportunity to the student athletes, not only, for them to get a great education at North Dakota State, but also have an opportunity to travel to some different places. So our schedule really changed. Our budget went way up, travel budget, scholarship budget. The interesting thing, and I don't think we were so successful in Division II, we had 5 scholarships on the men's side and 5 on the women's side.
Wow.
And we had, I would say, some of the best student athletes we've had come through this program during that time that were basically on maybe 20, 30, 40%. But they love being in Fargo. They love being at NDSU. So when you go from 5 and you transition up to getting to 18 on the women's side, and then 12 and a half on the men's, which took a little bit longer to get there on the men's side, you are able to offer a little bit more scholarship to kids, that from our state. I mean, our goal is we want to keep kids in the state of North Dakota. We want them to know they can be successful here. And I think we've proven that across the board in all event areas. We've had national competitors and, multi-time All-Americans, conference champs, things like that. So that the first, 3 years or probably 2 years of recruiting during that transition period were pretty tough, because we don't recruit negatively here, but we were definitely being hit pretty hard by other schools. Like, why would you go there? There's no national meet. There's no conference. So when we joined the Summit League, that was in 2008, that helped.
Was that your first year Division I, like fully eligible, or what year was that?
2009.
So 2009, you become quote unquote full-fledged Division I. You get national opportunities, you have a conference, or at least you're going into a conference. What year did you get to Fargo, Justin?
2011. Yeah.
Okay. So there's still a couple of years before Justin joins. As you're starting the Division I side of North Dakota State, talk to us about what was the culture, and maybe more appropriately, since you're going into this new division, what was the culture that the staff and you were installing into the program?
I mean, it goes back to the roots of North Dakota State. This has been a successful program way before I got here. And just the mentality, the hard work of our student athletes. We continued to, just really focus on the things that we believed in, throughout the years at NDSU, just continuing to work hard and bringing the right kids, and that's always been something that I learned from Coach Larson and Godfrey. Coach Godfrey was like, this kid might be the best kid in the state, but does he fit into our program? So our recruiting process is kind of like an interview process. We bring these kids in and they get a chance to meet with the kids on our team and meet with us and we meet with their families, but we want to make sure they're a good fit for our program too, because, one bad egg spoils everything. and things like that. So, there's been some times where I've had to sit down with a kid and tell them I'm not going to offer them scholarship because I don't feel like they're a good fit. Because I feel like that's the right thing to do. And at any program, but at North Dakota State, that's really what I was taught was get the right kids here that are going to work hard, that are, not going to cause problems, that are, good kids basically.
So
And
speaking of an interview process, were you part of the interview process just a year or two? Now we're up to where Justin's joined us. Were you part of his interview process? And let's be real here. What did you think of him as he came into the weekend with his suit and jacket and his yes, sir, no, sir? He probably saluted all you guys and gals that were in the recruiting process. What did you think of Justin during that weekend?
No, I mean, it was pretty obvious to me that Justin was going to be a good fit for our program, right away. I really liked the way that he interacted with us, our staff. He wasn't, he wasn't over full of himself, I guess. When you get, he wasn't a salesman, I guess. He came in, he kind of told it like it was.
Oh, I am hurt. Yeah, hold on. Let's
Sorry.
back up.
Oh,
Hold up. Now, here's the thing I will agree with you on, because I don't consider myself a salesman or saleswoman. I'm a sales professional. But to bash our profession right there, Stevie, that hurts me. This is the first time, almost 100 interviews. This is the first time someone has thrown daggers at my profession here.
Sorry, it was no point intended. I guess I should have rephrased it, but
Wow. You meant to say he wasn't a used car salesman.
used car salesman. There you go.
Oil salesman. Because you're right. There are salespeople that are like that, and they spoil our profession as a sales professional. So, okay, I will let you continue on there, sir. Thank you for your retraction and correction. So Justin came in and he was a real person. He was humble, hungry, smart.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. And another thing too is like he's very valuable, a guy that can coach all 4 throwing events. I was coaching the javelin at the time, and it's a time-consuming event. It's one of the toughest events I think to coach, because these kids compete just in outdoor track. They start when everybody else does, just trying to keep them mentally focused, keep them healthy, get them ready basically for March, when you start in September. So, for me, it was we've had throws coaches in the past that like we've talked about before, they didn't know the javelin. So I continued to coach it and, kind of train those kids like a pole vaulter or a multi-eventer, and things. So, but no, like I said, I think you just through interview processes and recruiting processes, you're just like, man, this guy would be a really good fit in our program. I think he, I hope he takes the job type of a deal. And there was a little more challenges, for Justin. He had to move to Fargo. He had to sell a house and all those things that you worry about when you offer somebody the job. Is this guy, is he going to take the job? Are we going to spend a few weeks now? And if you haven't been around Justin much, he doesn't make decisions very fast.
There's the real meat of what we want to learn here. Right?
I mean, I'm talking everything from ordering at a restaurant to buying a car to,
no decision, big or small.
I know.
thoroughly.
We missed that, Justin, and I want to give you a chance to defend yourself. What was that?
I said I like to analyze things very thoroughly. I want to make sure I know all the ins and outs.
It's that DEA in him. He wouldn't have just thrown the book at a guy right off the bat. He would have made sure his ducks were in a row before he threw the case at him. So that's respectful. That's respectful. So Justin, I want to give you the reverse. As you came into your interview and you're meeting Larson and Godfrey, what a great guy. And you meet Stevie. What were your impressions during I assume you probably had limited interactions with Stevie versus Larson and maybe some others. I could be wrong there, but what was your first thoughts of Stevie and working with him? And he coached javelin, which is your event. So you had to, like, is this guy going to coach javelin? What are we doing here?
First impression was like, this is a dude I want to hang out with, like without a doubt. Like and I'm kind of guilty of this. Like I sometimes, like first impressions to me are always important, and the vibe that I get off of them and all of those guys, whether it was Lars, Ryan, Stevie, the first impression was, cool, man, let's go get a beer, or let's go get a cup of coffee, or go, whatever. And it just seemed natural. It wasn't like a forced effort. No, it was just like there. I can't really describe it other than it was right.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a hard thing to describe, right? Like that comfortability. You can say it's comfortable and you can say it's natural, but it's hard to actually like give you the X, Y, and Z of what that is.
Yeah.
The same thing can be said.
Real people, and there was no hidden agendas.
The same thing can be said about culture. And so we had a good friend Connor Green reach out to us on Twitter, and he wants to know specifically, I'm going to say specifically towards Justin, but now Stevie, as you obviously were part of the program then and now over the program, Connor wants to know, what was it like when you first arrived at North Dakota State and the throwing culture wasn't the incredible program it is now? I don't know that's for a fact. So tell us, what was the throwing program versus what it is now? And then he adds on, what type of athlete are you trying to recruit outside of the obvious throws far? Competitiveness, personality. We talked a little bit about what you're looking for in Ndsu, but talk to us. What was that culture like and the program's stature, if you will, back then versus today?
I would say that, there's always been some success. And again, it depends on how you measure the success and what is the level. I think there's always been, like Stevie said, there's always been a super strong tradition at NDSU. The expectation has always been super high, regardless of what those marks were. The expectation was high. And all I wanted to do was to continue to raise that expectation to a higher level, because the foundation has already been set. I just wanted to raise it to a little bit of a higher level. I'm kind of a tough-nosed person. Like, I have a lot of high expectations and demands, because I know what it kind of takes to get those results. So I remember first day on the job at NDSU, warming up with the kids and just take them through a warm-up. And I remember one of the heavy throwers, all right, day's done. I'm exhausted. I'm like, that was the warm-up. He looked at me like, what the hell was that? I said, no, buddy, that was literally just a warm-up. So I knew, it was going to be a little bit of a fun challenge, and it was. And over time, we got to where we wanted to be. So I think the culture has always been there. It was just at a different level. And now it's just at a little bit of a different level now. And the beauty of what we always had done, and I think Steve will also agree, is we rely a lot on the upperclassmen, because at one point they were the freshmen, and then at some point it just kind of evolves, and the upperclassmen now are taking those younger people and, hey, this is how we do things here. This is the expectation. So I think once you, and I always say this, I say, well, hey, when do you train a puppy? Or when do you train a dog? You train a dog when it's a puppy. So we take these freshmen, we teach them, hey, this is how we want to do things here. This is what our expectations are. And then it just kind of keeps continuing on throughout those process, and it just carries on and carries on.
So it's important to start the career, if you will, right off the bat. Do you have that? So when you're talking about the career, 4 or 5 years, or Stevie Keller's 7-year plan or whatever he took for undergrad, it's important to start from the get-go. Do you take that down all the way to a practice? And what I mean by that is the warm-up is extremely important because that starts the day, or are you looking more macro?
All of the above, from the warm-up to anything and everything. Like, everything you do, have some, purpose to what you're doing, be accountable for what you're doing. Because not only is this going to help you as an athlete and also as a student, but it's going to help you 20 years down the road when you are a professional, when you do have a job, that you do check your email, that you do show up on time, that, when you're supposed to be at a place at a certain time, that you are there on time, because you might at one point in your life have a boss who says, Chucks, did you check that email? Email? What email? No. Well, you're fired. So, we want, and obviously college kids are college kids, but that's our goal, is like, we want to prepare these young men and women for real life down the road. So, these are expectations that we have.
how micro do you go? We're talking about throws specifically with you. You have a series of throws. Do you put a lot of focus on the first throw? And on top of that, we're talking about an event that has a beginning to an end. There's a run up in the javelin. There's the start of the turn of a hammer or a shot. Is that something you focus on, or now am I getting too minutia at that point?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on where you are in your career, obviously, depending on where you are in the season. Those things all change throughout the year. Like now we're in the phases of competitive season. We're getting ready for outdoor. So our preparation, it's very fine point. Like I expect athletes to have a vision before they even step into the ring. What is it like walking into the ring? What does that feel like to you? What does the nerve level feel like? And so many things that we explore. My job is to make sure through my experiences and other people's experiences, like always be prepared for something that you're not expecting. And that way your stress levels are always a little bit less when you compete, and all you have to think about is competing. So for me, like I really try to leave no stone unturned. I try to throw every possible situation at these athletes possible, and they're looking at me half the time like, why the heck are we doing this? Why are you playing these head games? And really, it's not so much that I'm trying to play a head game. I'm trying to prepare you for a situation that you can't forecast. So when you do show up to a meet, say, oh, I've been there before, no problem.
My favorite thing to do on the North Dakota State track Twitter account is to, when they do a throws picture, is to spot the Justin. And there's always a Justin over in the corner, right behind. I think I responded once and I said, Justin's always watching. Now, Stevie, we're talking a lot about throws here, obviously, but as the director of the track and field program there in your second or third season, do we count 2020? I don't know how to count 2020 anymore, but you're in your second or third year. How do you, I'm going to say, manage it all? So you've obviously got a good throws program, but spoiler alert for people who don't look at the results, it ain't just the throws program. There's a lot of success in all of the events, from distance sprints, jumps, etc. How do you manage the entire process culturally for NDSU?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I learned this long ago from my mentors, Lars and Ryan, as you surround yourself with great people that are willing to work hard and that can take, I approach it as every assistant coach on our staff is the head coach of their event area. I want them to have the responsibilities of taking care of their athletes and making decisions. And and obviously if they have to come to me with some questions, that's, my door is always open, things like that. But being here so long and just knowing how this program works, and I've been the head women's coach since 2013. When Ryan left, we continued with our head women's program. Separate head coaches, but we were basically combined coaches wise. And prior to that, Ryan did a really good job of mentoring me, bringing me into budget meetings, bringing me along, helping. I took a lot of Lars's responsibility on some of the things. And Lars, trusted me to do certain things, whether it was the equipment budget or, some of the recruiting, things like that. So, and then last year, when the pandemic hit, Lars retired, and we kind of knew it was coming, 41 years, at some point and things. And then at that time, we had conversations for several years here with our administration on, what's the model going to look like. And fortunately, I had a lot of input in that. Because they know we're successful. They support us, and they want our input, which means a lot to me, that they trust me to take over both programs and then be able to keep our whole staff here, and then hire a new assistant coach this summer who is a student athlete of mine, Reese Vega, and things. So being a head coach and being a director has been a little bit challenging because I haven't been able to coach as much as I would like to. I've given up some event areas that I really like, but I felt like to be a leader, to be able to touch every kid on our team or talk to every kid on our team, and I want them to know me. I want them to feel comfortable. I can't be coaching all the time. So I've taken some of my coaching responsibilities away so that I can watch practice. You know, I can go to the throws during a meet. I'm not standing by the pole vault pit all day long. And maybe it's not important to the kids, but I feel like, hey, if I can show up and support them, then they have trust in me. Like our head coach cares. We don't see him every day at practice, you know, because his groups go at different times, but he shows up, he watches us compete. You know, and we're still, I mean, we still got a ways to go. We have 6 coaches. We don't have a director of track and field. So, you know, I give each of our assistant coaches a responsibility. You know, somebody's in charge, a recruiting coordinator, camp director, and Justin's in charge of our equipment, you know, and academic stuff, you know, everything that the director of ops probably does at a bigger school. We kind of take that and we divvy it up. I do all the team travel, and things like that. So, you know, I give them a little bit of responsibility, but not too much. Their primary responsibility is to show up and coach. And the way we approach things at North Dakota State is like, you got to be able to have practice any time of the day. You know, we have an indoor facility to ourselves, so we can have practice at 7:30 in the morning if you want. You can have it at noon. You can have it at 2. And so when people ask me, why are you guys so successful? I really believe it's because we do a good job with it. We work hard. You know, they show up at 8 or 9 in the morning and they coach all day. You know, it isn't, hey, I'm going to coach from 9 to 11, then I'm going to be in my office for 3 hours and I'm going to go back to the track. Justin has groups all day long, and not having one practice time gives him an opportunity to give more individual attention. Groups of 3, groups of 4, groups of 1 at times. Yeah, there's certainly days where we have our whole group together. You know, and I don't think the throwers ever really are all together unless we're doing some sort of a comp, but you know, my group, sometimes the jumpers, the sprinters will all be together for certain days. But I really think that has a lot to do with our success, is that kids come here, they get that individual attention. You know, and we recruit kids that are going to progress. You know, our ultimate goal is that in this 4 or 5 year period that they're there, that they get better each year and continue to improve. Yeah, we've been fortunate and been able to get some kids that come in at a high level that are able to help us out at a conference level or maybe make nationals their first or second year. But if you look at a lot of the success we've had in Division I, it's the juniors and seniors. It's the 3rd, 4th, 5th year kids that have put in the time, that have, you know, they've had the experience of competing at big meets, and they've had that opportunity to go to the first rounds and move on and advance. So like I said before, I think a lot of it is we provide such a great opportunity for the student athletes to go to great meets and compete against high level competition, which ultimately brings out the best in them. And then it also gets them ready for a national or conference meet. Like, hey, I was on the track with kids from LSU and Texas A&M and UCLA and, you know, everywhere. And that's I always say Division I, II, III, NAIA, you're going to find good athletes. You know, it doesn't matter. And we compete against a lot of Division II, III, NAIA schools at North Dakota State when we host meets. It's, for some reason, it's not the best place for people to come, or people don't want to come here in the wintertime. I don't know what the deal is. But there's always kids around the area that are from other schools that show up and they win events. They, you know, they progress and things. So, yeah, so I mean, I think the culture that we establish, it really is the leadership of our student athletes, the leadership of our coaches, you know, and it goes all the way through me to our administration, having the support, you know, to help us be successful.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's interesting. You talked about, you're not sure if the kids appreciate you, you know, being around the different events. You know, 18 to 22-year-olds are very perceptive people. So I know that they appreciate that. And I get this sense when we're talking about culture for NDSU, for what you two have described with us today, you know, it seems like I get this picture of like this puzzle. And, you know, a puzzle doesn't work if any one piece is out of place or missing. They're all linked together. So shout out to like Ryan Godfrey and Lars, who did take you as an assistant coach. And, you know, you worked a little bit on the budget, or you worked on scheduling, taught you as you were moving up through the ranks. And now you're doing that with the rest of the staff as well. We need more of that development of the coach as a whole, not just coaching. You know, we especially now in our careers here, we know that coaching is unfortunately not just coaching. It's not just being on the circles or being in the sand pit. There are other parts of it, not only the paperwork side, but the people side. That is as important. And I think, I just kept getting that picture of this puzzle. And I think, if we were going to look for that magic blue pill, the big secret, why does NDSU perform so well as a team across multiple events, from a conference meet through the national meet and even post collegiately? I think that's the secret. I think it's the puzzle that works together because the staff works together with your administration. I hear a lot about your administration support when you talk about increasing in scholarships and increasing in travel budgets, et cetera. That takes a whole unit. And if any one of those units are missing, or if they act individually, if the throws coach is, never supports the rest of the team, and you never see him and his group, or you never know what's going on scholarship wise, it doesn't work. But in this case, because you're so intrinsically linked, it works. And that to me is the real magic pill of what NDSU. I guess it would be the magic green pill, right? For for the
There you
bison.
go.
That's great.
Hey,
Yeah, I mean, and it's, we meet once a week as a staff on Tuesdays. Trying to find an hour to sit down as a staff is challenging. And that was one of the things that I found as a head coach was like, man, I'd ask everybody like, hey, can we meet on this day? And, Wednesdays is good because that's usually a lighter day. Well, that's too late in the week when you're planning for recruiting on the weekend, you're planning for trips and things like that. So I think it was probably 2 years ago, I just got sick of asking and just said, hey, we're meeting at 11 o'clock from now until I'm done coaching here on Tuesdays. And, things come up, a kid has class conflict or they have a test or something like that, that's got moved that, you need to have practice and we move things around. But there's just a lot of flexibility in our staff. It's a family oriented. A lot of us have kids and I understand that as a parent of kids that things come up, kids are going to be sick. You're going to have to go to a basketball game. You're going to have to do this. So, it's easy for me to understand that, hey, maybe Justin's got to leave early this day and somebody's got to help out with his group because he's got to take his daughter to something. And I, as much as I'd like to think our job is super important, there's a lot of other things that are bigger than our job,
Yes.
and things. So, and having the kids around, that's one of the things I think that with this pandemic and all the COVID guidelines and things like that, we haven't been able to have our kids at the indoor track as much as we've had in the past for practice. And now things are starting to loosen up a little bit and, we're seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. So now you start to see those kids come to practice every once in a while. And for the student athletes, I've realized like that's the simplicity of those kids' life. And then when a college kid has an opportunity to sit down and play with one of these kids in the sand, and I didn't really think of it until one day, one of my female athletes came up to me and she's like, I needed that. And I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, I spent an hour playing with your daughter in the sand. And she goes, I'm so stressed out and all this stuff. And she's like, I needed that. So it's pretty cool to see like how our student athletes, like they just, they want to be around little kids and they want, it isn't like, oh, coach has got his kids here again. It's more like, when are you bringing your kids? We haven't seen them forever.
I'm reminded of Lars taking you to see his mom on the interview right there. Again, you can say we're a family. We strive for X, Y, and Z, but that right there is an example of action of family and relationship. And again, that overarching word of culture. And you talked about it's super hard to get people together for a staff meeting. And you know what? It was super hard to get you guys here today. And I'm so appreciative. Justin, I've already made you late for practice. So we're going to wrap it up today. Justin, Stevie, I'm just so thankful. Honestly, your time is always one of the most valuable things that you can give us. And I think your story, your individual stories on how you got to where you are today, and that story is still being written, which I love. And then the examples of real culture and what it can do to transform a program and make it more successful. It's the real 1 + 1 = 3 type of attitude. All your coaching staff, administration, the type of kids and how you recruit those kids all add up to a much larger sum than them on an individual. So thankful today that you would join us and give us that magic green pill, if you will.
Thank you so much, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Hopefully you learned something about our program here today and a little bit more about Fargo, North Dakota.
Well, I think there's a lot more to explore here. We may have to do a part 2 one day, and I'll make sure it's in the summer maybe in the fall there's a little bit better, but maybe we'll have to revisit this because I think there's a lot more to go here. We didn't get into some specifics that we would have loved to, because I think there's a lot of value for what you guys as a staff are bringing together for this great sport of track and field. And thank you for listening today. I'm just so, again, grateful for your time and energy today as you listen to these awesome coaches and the coaches we've had in the past. Please go back and check out our library. There's some great content back there with amazing coaches. And again, as always, if you received value from today's podcast, I'm going to bet that someone in your network would receive value. Please share Facebook, TikTok, email newsletters, smoke signals. I don't care. Just share it out there and join us next week when we'll bring you another awesome coach, maybe a couple of coaches. Who knows what I'm going to do with this podcast? We're just going to continue to explore the coaching journey and how valuable that is. Thanks a lot and have a great day.